The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Ling. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the 4 rogue cards from the Path to Carcosa, the second deluxe expansion for the Arkham Horror LCG. I'm reviewing each of the classes separately, so make sure you check out each of the other videos when you get the chance. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. So with that in mind, let's get started. The first rogue card in the box is Stealth. It's a 2-cost asset with an agility skill icon and the talent trait. It has the action trigger Exhaust Stealth Evade. The chosen enemy gets -2 evade for this evasion attempt. If you successfully evade the enemy, disengage with it, but do not exhaust it. Until the end of your turn, that enemy cannot engage with you. Now, I really enjoy playing around with the evade mechanic in the Arkham Horror LCG because it really takes me back to my gaming roots. My introduction to Lovecraft in the mythos was the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game by Chaosium. Those of you who have had a chance to play that great game know that sneaking around is imperative because attacking anything more powerful than a measly cultist is suicide. You don't grab your shotgun and go toe-to-toe with a great old one in the Call of Cthulhu. You will simply die, go insane, or both. Obviously, FFG has taken a different approach to the mythos with its Arkham Files properties, and I'm totally okay with that. Sneaking around can still be great fun if you haven't had a chance to try playing a cat-and-mouse game with the hunting horror from the Miskatonic Museum yet. I highly recommend it. It feels like there are a lot more decisions to make when you're trying to evade enemies rather than killing them outright, which I think makes it more rewarding in the end when you finally beat the scenario. That said, I don't think the evasion mechanic is quite there yet. The designers have sprinkled the evasion cards across all of the classes with the exception of Guardian, which can make it challenging to build a dedicated evasion deck as you hunt for the various pieces you need. Most players still prefer killing enemies to evading them because it's simply more efficient. You also earn more experience for killing enemies, so you're really hurting your investigator's development in the long run by evading them. Some investigators can pack Delve Too Deep, that mystic event from the Miskatonic Museum Mythos pack, to try to make up for the lost experience points, but it's hardly an ideal solution. Hunters are another fundamental problem you need to solve if you're planning to go the evasion route. Short of killing them, I can only think of one way to deal with hunters once they hit the table, and that's the level 2 version of the Survivor event, Close Call. I could probably go on at great length about playing evasion decks, but that's probably a topic best left for another episode. We're here to talk cards in the Path to Carcosa, so let's get back to Stealth. It's sadly, Stealth really doesn't solve the problems that I've mentioned above, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad card. Most of the evasion cards that we've seen so far have been transient events or skills. You play them once and they're gone. If you're lucky, you might get that bonus once or twice a game. Stealth is different. Much like any other weapon in your arsenal, it will sit on the table and reduce the difficulty of the evasion skill test whenever you need it. And it's also non-unique, so you can have 2 of them on the table at the same time for more evasion goodness. The biggest problem with Stealth is that that bonus on the evasion skill test comes at a very high price. The enemy does not exhaust if the skill test is successful. That's very thematic and all, but I don't think it's worth it in most cases, since exhausting an enemy is one of the greatest benefits of evasion in the first place. Now, I have to admit that I misread this card the first time I looked at it. For some reason, I had convinced myself that the enemy didn't engage you until the end of the round. Unfortunately, Stealth only lasts until the end of your turn. If the enemy didn't engage you until the end of the round, you could justify sticking around for a turn to play assets or gather some of the clues that are at that location. As it stands, you'd better get the hell out of dodge after evading the enemy, because the moment your turn ends, that enemy will re-engage you and more than likely attack you during the enemy phase. Now, most players I know evade enemies to avoid being attacked, and Stealth won't help you there, and that really limits the appeal of this card. Now, you might be able to stealth past an O'Banion's Thug, but the card doesn't really help you very much against hunters. If you evade a hunting night gaunt, for example, using just the traditional evade check, there's that sweet, sweet grace period. After it exhausts, you can move away and you're safe in the knowledge that you won't have to deal with that night gaunt until at least the next turn, and possibly more if you can stay one step ahead of it on the map. That's not so with stealth. If you stealth that night gaunt, you'd better be moving twice, because the moment your turn ends, it'll be in hot pursuit. That's not ideal, especially if there are other actions that you'd plan to take at the interim, such as playing assets or gathering clues. Stealth is of also questionable value in multiplayer. The enemy you evade using stealth may not engage you during your turn, but it will immediately engage with any other investigator at your location. Now that might be okay if that investigator is, say, Zoe Samras, who gains a resource for that engagement and has a pretty good shot at killing it. Less so if it's Daisy Walker. You might want to check which investigators your friends are playing before you put stealth in your deck. I think evasion can be a very viable strategy in multiplayer, since you can use it to lock down a dangerous enemy until it can be safely killed. Again, stealth won't help you with that. If you really want to stop an enemy from wreaking havoc, you're better off forgoing the bonus to the skill test and evading it the old-fashioned way. And that really begs the question, why are you playing stealth in your deck if it's not helping you deal with the enemies that you want to deal with? The more I talk about stealth, the less I'm starting to like it. Stealth will help you slip past a mobster or an O'Banion's thug, but you're not going to fool a hunter for long with this, and hunters are quite common in scenarios. It's a shame stealth feels so limited, because I think evasion should be a viable strategy in the Arkham Horror LCG, and I really hope the designers will keep exploring that design space as we move forward. The next rogue card in the box is Sleight of Hand. It's a one-cost event with intellect and agility skill icons and the trick trait. It has the game text fast. Play only during your turn. Put an item asset into play from your hand. At the end of your turn, if that asset is still in play, return it to your hand. Now, this is an extremely versatile card that lets you pull off all sorts of great tricks during a game. First off, the ability to play an item as a free action for one measly resource is incredible. It can even save you a resource or two on those one-shot items like the police badge, lantern, or fire extinguisher, as long as you have no intention of returning them to your hand at the end of your turn. Secondly, this card is tailor-made for cards that use supplies, ammo, or charges. In some cases, you can effectively double how many times you can use them. Drop a flashlight for a resource, use it to investigate 3 times, and pop it back to your hand so you can play it again during a later turn. You can pull off the same trick with cards like Liquid Courage or any of the weapons that use ammo. If you've got Sleight of Hand and a weapon, you don't have to worry about getting caught flat-footed by an enemy. You can drop your .45 automatic into play with Sleight of Hand and unload the clip into the enemy, confident you can return it to your hand and play it again on a later turn. If you're concerned about taking some damage or horror, say because you're moving between the train cars on the Essex County Express, you could play Sleight of Hand for a bulletproof vest or Elder Sign amulet to absorb the damage, and then once you're done, you just get to pop that back to your hand and it's ready to play on a later turn, ready to absorb even more damage. Sleight of Hand is a great card, and it's going to see a lot of play in any deck that relies on items to get the job done. I'm quite confident players are going to discover all sorts of interesting uses for this card as the card pool expands. The next card in the box is a rogue event. This is Daring Maneuver. It's free to play and has one wild icon and the Gambit trait. It's fast and it has the game text, play when you would succeed at a skill test. You get +2 skill value for this test. So the Succeed by 2 mechanic and the Overachiever archetype that I discussed a couple videos ago is finally receiving some more support in the form of Daring Maneuver. If you're playing cards such as the 41 caliber Derringer, Switchblade, or Opportunist, which rely on the Succeed by 2 mechanic, including a copy or two of Daring Maneuver in your deck seems like a no-brainer. It will take some of the pressure off the skill icons in your hand and your resources, which is always helpful. Now, I'm not crazy about having to play a card like Daring Maneuver to make the other cards in my deck work properly. A better player than I would probably recommend just cutting that jank and playing some more efficient cards. However, the succeed by 2 mechanic looks like it's here to stay, and daring maneuver is currently one of the best options to guarantee that you'll succeed by 2 at least on a couple of key tests per game. Daring Maneuver may support the succeed by 2 mechanic, but it's such a narrow card that I could see a lot of players cutting it from their decks as the competition for deck slots heats up with the release of each Mythos pack. In previous videos I played a Jenny Barnes deck based on the succeed by 2 mechanic, and I'm not entirely certain what I would cut from it to make room for a pair of Daring Maneuvers. I'm leaning toward the 2 copies of Manual Dexterity, but I'd need to test it further to make sure that was the right choice. I wouldn't be surprised, however, if I cut Daring Maneuver from my deck altogether at some point to make room for more versatile cards. There are a couple other things you can do with Daring Maneuver that are worth mentioning. First, you can use it to save a supply if you're using lockpicks. It's a great rogue asset in this box that we'll look at shortly. It's not an amazing play or anything like that, but it might come in handy toward the end of a scenario if you're running low on supplies, but you still have a couple of key investigate checks to pass. Now, I can't take credit for the second idea. That belongs to Frank and Peter over at Drawn to the Flame podcast. You can play Daring Maneuver in a Zoe Samaras deck if you're running the shotgun for the extra damage. Now, I'm not sure whether Zoe can afford to dedicate 2 of her precious out-of-class deck slots to the combo, but it seems like a good idea in theory. You know, adding a couple extra damage is always a nice way to take down some enemies. I'm a little concerned that Daring Maneuver would be virtually worthless without the shotgun, though, and I would really hate to top deck this thing if I needed something else, so I'm not crazy about the idea of a couple of dead cards potentially floating around in my deck. I am tempted to give it a shot, however, in standalone mode, just to see if it can be done. Daring Maneuver is an offense, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention that SEFINA Rousseau can potentially abuse it with the Painted World, while Wendy Adams could play it repeatedly with her amulet. Daring Maneuver is a very narrow card that only goes in a very specific type of deck. If you're not playing around with the other cards that rely on the succeed by 2 mechanic, you can safely leave this one in the box. If you're interested in exploring the succeed by 2 mechanic and the overachiever archetype in Road, check out the link to my previous videos on that topic in the description below. I'd be curious to hear how Daring Maneuver works out for you in those decks. The final row card in the box is Lockpicks. This asset costs 3 resources and 1 experience point. It has an intellect skill icon, the item tool, and illicit traits, and it takes up a hand slot. It uses 3 supplies, and if the Lockpicks has no supplies, you discard it. It has the action trigger Exhaust Lockpicks. Investigate. Add your agility skill value to your skill value for this investigation. If you do not succeed by at least 2, remove 1 supply from Lockpicks. Rogues finally receive another card to shore up their investigation skill tests, and it's a great one. Basically, Lockpicks is an upgraded version of Flashlight. It costs 1 more resource to play, but it provides a greater bonus. Jenny Barnes and SEFINA Rousseau investigate with a skill value of 6 with Lockpicks in play, while Skids O'Toole and Wendy Adams investigate with a skill value of 7. That's pretty amazing. Better yet, if the skill test succeeds by at least 2, you don't remove a supply from Lockpicks. I really like how the succeed by 2 mechanic was implemented on this card. It feels a lot more like a perk than something that is absolutely essential to the card's function, and I hope to see other cards in the future that follow this type of model. Now, succeeding by 2 is often easier said than done, and Skids and Wendy are in the best position to avoid breaking their Lockpicks. Take a scenario such as the Midnight Masks, for example. The shroud value on locations averages somewhere between 2 and 3, depending on which locations are in play. That means Skids and Wendy should be able to succeed by 2 on or more at all but the highest shroud locations fairly consistently. With a little luck, Lockpicks could still be on the table long after a flashlight would have run out of batteries. Lockpicks are a welcome addition to the Rogue arsenal because the The class's options to boost its investigate skill value were so limited in the past. During the Dunwich Legacy cycle, Jenny and Skids' best bet was Streetwise from the Blood on the Altar Mythos pack. While Streetwise is undeniably powerful and can crush a scenario all by itself, it's also extremely resource intensive. Jenny could handle the pressure on her resource pool because she generates that extra resource each round. Skids, not so much. I always felt as though Skids really struggled to fuel Streetwise and take advantage of his free trigger to take an extra action, or the succeed by 2 mechanic if you decided to go with that type of deck archetype. I think Lockpicks is going to go a long way to alleviate some of that pressure and give rogue players more flexibility when they sit down to construct their decks. Lockpicks also cost fewer experience than Streetwise, which is great in a class with a lot, and I mean a lot, of very expensive upgrades. I really like Lockpicks, and I can't wait to try them out in my rogue deck. I think it's important to keep in mind that the card does have the same limitations as Flashlight in scenarios like Where Doom Awaits, which forces you to investigate the hard way. So I wouldn't remove the perceptions from your deck just yet, but in most of the scenarios we've encountered so far, Lockpicks are going to come in very handy for any investigator who can take them. That's going to be my review of the rogue cards from the Path to Carcosa Deluxe expansion. A bit of a mixed bag here, I think. I'm not crazy about stealth. That it does give you a bonus on those evade checks against certain types of enemies, but it does come at an awfully steep price that the enemy does not exhaust. You could slip by things like the O'Banion's Thug, but the hunters are really going to give you a problem. Sleight of Hand is simply a great card. It lets you pull off all sorts of cool tricks with items that rely on ammo, supplies, or charges. Daring Maneuver is an interesting addition to the Succeed by 2 mechanic. It does support it, and it will give you a chance to ensure that you succeed by 2 on at least a couple of skill checks a turn. And if you ever do try that Zoe Samra shotgun daring maneuver trick, please let me know. I'd be very curious to see how that turns out for you. And finally, Lockpicks. I think that's just a great addition to the Rogue's Toolbox. That will come in very handy. A nice upgrade from the Flashlight from the core set, and a nice alternative to Streetwise that you could use during the Dunwich Legacy cycle. A lot less resource intensive, and I think rogues do have quite a few resource intensive cards, so it's nice to have an option to take one that doesn't cost them resources in the long run. That's going to do it for me today. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate it if you could leave me a thumbs up. It helps out the channel a great deal. If you have a comment to leave, please leave it down below. I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to say. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to be notified of when I release future content. If you'd like to reach me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.